Three true Alaskan horror stories. Hey everyone. Before we get started, I just want to say, Alaska is beautiful. Vast wilderness, northern lights, untouched nature. But there's something else about Alaska that people don't talk about enough. The isolation, the darkness. The fact that in some parts of the state you can scream as loud as you want, and no one will hear you. The stories you're about to hear come from people who experienced the darker side of America's last frontier. These are three true Alaskan horror stories. Story 1, The Cabin in Denali. So this first story comes from a guy named Marcus, who was 24 at the time this happened. Marcus had always been into hiking and outdoor survival, and in the fall of 2019, he decided to take a solo trip to a remote area just outside Denali National Park. He wasn't going to the tourist spots. No, he wanted the real Alaska experience. Deep wilderness, no people, just him and nature. He'd rented a small cabin through some obscure website. The listing barely had any information, just a few photos of a weathered wooden structure surrounded by dense forest, and a description that said it was off-grid and secluded. Perfect, Marcus thought. The owner, an older man named Carl, met him at a gas station about 40 miles from the cabin to hand over the keys. Carl didn't say much, just looked at Marcus with these cold, watery blue eyes and said, "Stay inside after dark, and don't go near the shed out back." Marcus kind of laughed it off. He figured Carl was just trying to add some local flavor, maybe spook the city kid a little. But Carl didn't smile. He just stared at Marcus for a long moment, then got back in his truck and drove away. The drive to the cabin took another 2 hours down increasingly rough roads. By the time Marcus arrived, the sun was already starting to dip low on the horizon. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. Small, rustic, surrounded by towering spruce trees. There was a shed about 50 yards behind the cabin, half hidden in the shadows. Marcus grabbed his gear and headed inside. The interior was sparse. A wood-burning stove, a cot with a thin mattress, a small table, and a single chair. No electricity, no running water. Just a couple of kerosene lamps. Exactly what he'd signed up for. Marcus spent the rest of the evening getting settled, starting a fire and making some food. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped fast. He could see his breath inside the cabin. That first night was quiet. Too quiet. Marcus had been in the wilderness before. But there was something different about this place. Usually you'd hear owls or the rustle of small animals or the wind through the trees. But here, nothing. Just this heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Around midnight, Marcus was lying on the cot, drifting off to sleep, when he heard it. A sound from outside. It was faint at first, like someone dragging something heavy through the dirt. He sat up, listening. The dragging sound continued, slow and rhythmic, moving around the perimeter of the cabin. His heart started to pound. He told himself it was probably just an animal. A bear, maybe. But then he heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. And they were bipedal. Marcus got up quietly and moved to the window. He pressed his face against the cold glass, trying to see outside, but the darkness was absolute. No moon, no stars. Just blackness. The footsteps stopped. Everything went silent again. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing, waiting. And then, out of nowhere, something slammed against the side of the cabin. The whole structure shook. Marcus jumped back, his pulse racing. He grabbed the hunting knife he'd brought and held it in front of him, hands trembling. But then, nothing. No more sounds. No more movement. He waited by the window for another hour, knife in hand, but whatever it was didn't come back. Eventually, exhaustion took over and he collapsed back onto the cot, though he barely slept the rest of the night. When morning finally came, Marcus went outside to investigate. He walked around the entire cabin looking for tracks, looking for any sign of what had been out there. And that's when he saw them. Handprints. On the side of the cabin where the impact had come from. But these weren't normal handprints. They were huge, easily twice the size of his own, with long, claw-like fingers. And the prints were smeared like whatever made them had pressed hard against the wood, dragging its hands downward. Marcus felt sick. He thought about leaving right then, but he'd paid for 3 nights and he didn't want to admit defeat after just 1 night, so he decided to stay. During the day, he explored the area, trying to shake off the fear. But he couldn't stop thinking about those handprints. And he couldn't stop thinking about what Carl had said. Don't go near the shed out back. Curiosity got the better of him. Around mid-afternoon, Marcus walked out to the shed. It was old, the wood rotting in places, and the door was held shut with a rusted padlock. He peered through the gaps in the wood, trying to see inside, but it was too dark. Then he noticed something carved into the door. Words. He had to brush away dirt and moss to read them. It comes at night. A chill ran down his spine. He backed away from the shed and decided he didn't need to know what was inside. That evening, Marcus barricaded the cabin door with the table and kept his knife close. He also kept one of the kerosene lamps burning, even though it wasted fuel. He wasn't going to sit in complete darkness again. The second night was worse. The dragging sound started earlier, right after sunset. And this time they were louder, closer. Marcus could hear something circling the cabin, slow and methodical, like it was stalking him. Then came the scratching. Long, drawn-out scrapes against the wooden walls, starting at one end of the cabin and moving all the way around. It sounded like claws on a chalkboard, and it made his teeth ache. He sat on the cot, knife in hand, trying to control his breathing. And then he heard it, a voice. Low and raspy, barely above a whisper, but unmistakably human. It said, "Let me in." Marcus froze. His blood turned to ice. The voice came again from right outside the door. "Let me in, Marcus." It knew his name. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just sat there, gripping the knife, staring at the door. The scratching continued, and the voice kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "Let me in, Marcus. Let me in." This went on for hours, literal hours. Marcus thought he was going to lose his mind. And then, just like the night before, it stopped. The silence returned. But this time, Marcus heard one last thing before whatever it was left. Footsteps, not walking away from the cabin, walking toward the shed. Marcus didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, he packed his things immediately. He was done. He didn't care about the money or the experience. He just wanted to get the hell out of there. But as he was loading his car, he made the mistake of looking at the shed one more time. The padlock was on the ground. The door was open. He should have just left. He knows that now. But something compelled him to look inside. He walked over slowly, every instinct screaming at him to turn around. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The shed was almost empty, just some old tools and a workbench. But on the far wall there were scratch marks, deep gouges in the wood, like something had been trying to claw its way out. And in the center of the floor there was a trapdoor. Marcus's hands were shaking as he pulled it open. Below was a small dirt cellar, and inside there were chains. Heavy chains bolted to the walls, and in the corner there was a pile of clothes. Old, torn, stained with something dark. Marcus didn't need to see more. He stumbled backward out of the shed and ran to his car. As he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the trees, just barely visible in the shadows, was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, with long arms that hung down past its knees. It didn't move. It just watched him go. Marcus never found out what that thing was. He tried to report it to the authorities, but when he gave them the address of the cabin, they told him no such property existed. The listing had been removed from the website. and the phone number Carl had given him was disconnected. To this day, Marcus doesn't know if what he encountered was something human or something else entirely, but he knows one thing for sure. He'll never go back to Alaska.
Story 2. The Fishing Village in the summer of 2017. Elena Vasquez, a dedicated marine biologist in her late 20s, received an assignment that promised both professional intrigue and personal solitude. She was to study the declining fish populations in a remote fishing village on Alaska's rugged coast. The place was called Kivaluk, a speck on the map accessible only by boat or seaplane, nestled between jagged cliffs and the unforgiving Bering Sea. With a population of fewer than 100 souls, mostly indigenous, Alaskans whose families had weathered the harsh elements for generations, it was the epitome of isolation. Elena, who had grown up in the bustling streets of Seattle, craved the quiet focus this trip would offer. Little did she know that the silence hid something far more sinister. The seaplane touched down on the choppy waters of the bay just as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the cluster of weathered wooden houses. The pilot, a grizzled man named Hank with a perpetual squint from years of scanning horizons, helped unload her gear, sampling kits, notebooks, a laptop, and enough provisions for 2 weeks. "Folks here keep to themselves," he warned, his voice gravelly over the hum of the engine. "Don't expect much chit-chat. Radio if you need an early pickup." Elena nodded, her dark hair whipping in the wind, and watched as the planet taxied away, leaving her truly alone. The village elder, Thomas, met her at the dock. He was an old man, his face etched like ancient driftwood with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. He led her to a small cabin on the outskirts, a one-room structure with a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed, and windows that rattled in the constant breeze. "Stay out of the deep waters if you can," he said cryptically before leaving her to settle in. The locals eyed her from afar. Women mending nets, men repairing boats, children darting between houses like shadows. They were polite when approached, offering curt nods or brief answers to her questions about the local ecosystem. But there was an invisible barrier, a distance that made Elena feel like an intruder. Her first few days fell into a rhythmic routine. Mornings began with coffee brewed over the stove, followed by hours owner-rented skiff, netting samples of salmon and halibut, noting water temperatures and salinity levels. The sea was alive with activity, seals barking from rocky outcrops, eagles soaring overhead, and the occasional humpback whale breaching in the distance. Afternoons were spent cataloging date under the pale Alaskan sun, which lingered late into the evening. The fish stocks were indeed dwindling, likely due to overfishing and warming waters, but Elena found solace in the work. It distracted her from the nagging loneliness that crept in at night, when the wind howled like a living thing and the waves crashed relentlessly against the shore. On the 4th night, as Elena pored over her notes by the flickering light of a lantern, a sound pierced the quiet. It was singing, ethereal, melodic, drifting in from the village like a siren's call. At first she dismissed it as a cultural ritual, perhaps a celebration tied to the lunar cycle or a harvest tradition. The voices wove together in harmony, but the tune was alien, dissonant notes that evoked the deep, unknowable ocean rather than human joy. Curiosity tugged at her, and she rose to peer out the window. The village lay shrouded in darkness. No lights glowed from the homes, as if everyone had extinguished their lamps in unison. Yet, figures emerged from the shadows, men in oilskins, women with shawls drawn tight, children clutching hands, all moving with eerie synchronization toward the docks. Their steps were slow, deliberate, like sleepwalkers in a shared dream. The singing grew louder, closer, wrapping around Elena like fog. A chill spider walked down her spine. This wasn't right. No laughter, no instruments. Just that haunting chorus pulling them inexorably to the water. Heart pounding, Elena grabbed her coat and slipped outside. The air was crisp, salted with the tang of seaweed and fish. She followed at a distance, her boots crunching on gravel, but no one turned. At the docks, the entire village assembled, facing the black expanse of the sea. The moon hung full and bloated, its reflection shimmering on the waves like a silver path. Then as one, they stepped forward. Into the water they went, the cold lapping at their ankles, then knees, waists. Elena's breath caught. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice cracking in the night. "What are you doing?" But they didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge her. Deeper they waded, chests submerged, necks until only their heads bobbed above the surface. The singing persisted, muffled now by the water, bubbles rising as their mouths dipped perilously close. Elena stood on the shore, frozen in horror, tears blurring her vision. Were they drowning themselves? A mass suicide? Hermond raced. Should she swim out, pull them back? But the sea was frigid, deadly. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then abruptly the song ceased. Silence crashed down like a wave. The villagers turned expressionless and trudged back to land, water streaming from their clothes. They passed her without a glance, dispersing to their homes as if nothing had occurred. Elena retreated to her cabin, bolting the door, her body trembling. Sleep evaded her. Every creak of the wood was a footstep, every gust of wind a whisper. Dawn brought no relief. The village stirred as usual, fishermen heading out, smoke curling from chimneys, the scent of frying fish wafting through the air. Elena ventured out, approaching a woman named Mira whom she'd spoken to briefly about local catches. "Last night, what was that? The singing, the water?" Mira paused in her net mending, her dark eyes blank. "Don't know what you mean, miss. Must have been the wind." Others gave similar responses, polite denials, evasive shrugs. It was as if the event had been erased from collective memory. Determined to finish her work and escape, Elena threw herself into her research. But the strangeness escalated. During a midday conversation with a young fisherman, he suddenly froze mid-sentence, his eyes glazing over, staring toward the horizon. It lasted a full minute before He blinked and continued as if uninterrupted. Similar episodes dotted the days. A child dropping a toy to stand motionless, a group of elders halting in their tracks. And the stares, intense, unblinking gazes fixed on Elena from doorways or across the street, making her skin prickle with unease. She began avoiding eye contact, hurrying back to her cabin at dusk. Nights grew longer, heavier. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, faint echoes of that song. Elena's dreams twisted into nightmares, drowning in ink-black water pulled down by unseen hands. On the 7th day, while sampling near a secluded cove, she found something odd. A cluster of ancient carvings on a rock face, half eroded by tides. Symbols resembling tentacles or waves encircled by human figures in supplication. She sketched them hurriedly, a knot forming in her stomach. The 8th night shattered her resolve. Awakened by scratching at the door, slow, rhythmic, like claws on wood, Elena lay rigid in bed. Her flashlight beam trembled as she aimed it at the entrance. The sound persisted, deliberate. Then a voice, high, childlike, sweet as poisoned honey. "Come outside, Elena. Come sing with us." Her name, how did they know her full name? She hadn't shared it widely. More voices joined, a chorus of whispers. Men, women overlapping in pleas. "Join us in the water. It's waiting for you." The sleeper calls. Terror clawed at her throat. She buried herself under blankets, hands clamped over ears, willing it to end. Hours dragged. The scratching waxed and waned, the voices fading only as gray light seeped through the curtains. Exhaustion claimed her briefly. But she woke to pack frantically. Radioing Hank, she fabricated an emergency, illness, anything to summon the plane early. While waiting, desperation drove her to Thomas's home. The elder sat by a fire carving a totem from whalebone. "Tell me the truth," Elena demanded, her voice shaking. "What's happening here?" He regarded her with those weary eyes, sighing deeply. "Sit, child. You've seen too much." Kivaluk, he explained, had stood for over 2 centuries bound by ancient pacts. The sea gives, but it takes. Beneath the waves lies the sleeper, an entity older than the ice, older than our people. It stirs with the tides, demanding tribute. Every full moon we sing to it, walk to its threshold. It tests our loyalty. Those who falter, it claims. His voice dropped. Years ago, outsiders came, loggers, miners. They mocked our ways. The sleeper took them all, one by one, dragged, screaming into the depths. We survive by honoring it, Elena pressed. And if someone refuses? Thomas's gaze darkened. It hungers. It pulls you under body and soul. How escape? She fled his words, boarding the seaplane as it arrived. The village shrinking below like a bad dream. Back in Seattle, Elena buried the experience, resigning from fieldwork to teach at a university. She never published her findings from Kivaluk, burning her notes in a fit of paranoia. But the echoes lingered. Late at night, when the city hushed, she'd hear it. The faint, haunting song calling from across the miles. Was it imagination? Or had witnessing the ritual bound her to the sleeper's gaze? She avoided the ocean now, fearing that one day the pull would become too strong, drawing her back to the water's edge to join the chorus forever. Story 3. The hunting trip. In the biting winter of 2018, David Harlan, a rugged outdoorsman from Anchorage, finally embarked on the hunting trip he'd been dreaming about for years. At 35, with a day job as a mechanic that left him craving the wild, he rallied his 2 closest buddies, Jake, a superstitious electrician with a knack for tall tales, and Ryan, a stoic former Marine who approached everything with military precision. They'd planned meticulously, packing rifles, tents, freeze-dried meals, and enough ammo to take down a herd. Their target, caribou migrating through the Alaskan backcountry, a vast expanse of snow-blanketed forests and frozen rivers far from any road or rescue. A bush plane dropped them off at a remote airstrip, the pilot's parting words echoing in the crisp air. "Weather's turning. Radio if you need out early. Good luck." The first 2 days were pure bliss, the kind of raw freedom that made the grind of city life fade away. They set up camp in a sheltered valley, a cluster of nylon tents ringed by towering spruce trees heavy with snow. Morning started with steaming coffee over a propane stove, breaths fogging in the sub-zero chill. They tracked caribou herds across the tundra, their boots crunching through fresh powder. By evening, they'd bagged 2 decent bulls, the meat dressed and hung to freeze. Evenings were spent around a crackling fire, swapping stories under a sky ablaze with aurora borealis. "This is living," David grinned, carving into a venison steak. Jake nodded warily, always glancing at the encroaching shadows, while Ryan methodically cleaned his rifle. Ever the pragmatist, but on the 3rd day, as they pushed deeper into the forest in search of fresh tracks, the wilderness began to whisper its warnings. The trees grew denser, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers, blocking out the weak winter sun. Snow muffled their steps, creating an oppressive silence broken only by the occasional caw of a raven. Then abruptly they stumbled into a clearing, perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, as if carved by some unnatural force. The ground was barren, devoid of snow or vegetation, a stark patch of frozen earth. In its center lay a mound of bones. Caribou ribs, moose femurs, wolf skulls, all bleached white and arranged in intricate spirals, forming what looked like a rune or altar. Feathers and scraps of fur were woven through the pile, and at the apex sat a single human-like jawbone, though elongated and distorted. Jake froze, his face draining of color. Holy shit, guys. This ain't right. Looks like some kind of ritual site. He crossed himself, a habit from his Catholic upbringing. David knelt to examine it, his gloved hand hovering but not touching. Come on, man. Probably just some eccentric trapper's idea of art. Or animals piling up bones, I've heard of that. Ryan snapped photos on his phone, chuckling. Yeah, or Bigfoot's dinner table. Lighten up, Jake, we're not in a horror flick. But even as they laughed it off, unease settled over them. The air in the clearing felt heavier, colder, like the forest was holding its breath. They snapped a few more pictures for proof, David joked, and pressed on, but the mood had shifted. Jake muttered about bad juju the whole hike back, and for the first time David felt eyes on his back, though turning revealed only empty woods. That night, as darkness swallowed the valley, the true nightmare began. They huddled around the fire, flames dancing shadows across their faces, roasting rabbit skewers from a snare. The temperature plummeted, frost rhyming their beards. Conversation lagged, the earlier discovery lingering like a bad aftertaste. Then from the distant ridges came a howl, not the high, mournful cry of a wolf pack. This was deeper, primal, a guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground and into their bones. It rose in pitch, warbling unnaturally, echoing off the trees in ways that defied acoustics, as if multiple throats produced it from one source. Ryan bolted upright, spilling his coffee. What the hell was that? His voice was steady, but his eyes darted. David gripped his mug tighter. Wolf, maybe. Or a bear vocalizing. Sounds weird out here. Jake shook his head, whispering, That's no animal I know. The howl dragged on for minutes, fading into silence that was somehow worse. The usual nocturnal symphony, the rustle of small creatures, the wind sighing through pines, had vanished. The forest was a void. They crawled into their tents, zipping sleeping bags against the cold, but sleep was elusive. Around midnight, footsteps shattered the quiet. Heavy, deliberate thuds crunching snow just beyond the camp's perimeter. David sat up, heart hammering, and grabbed his Remington 700, chambering a round. You hear that? He hissed. Ryan was already alert, flashlight in hand. Jake whimpered. Told you. Bad juju. The steps circled them, slow and methodical, like a predator sizing up prey. David shone his beam into the blackness, nothing but trunks and snow. Who's there? He bellowed, voice cracking slightly. No answer, just the rhythmic crunching drawing nearer. Then breathing, raspy, labored as if from lungs the size of bellows. It hovered at the fire's edge where embers glowed faintly. Back to back the trio stood, rifles raised, adrenaline surging. A shape materialized between two trees caught in the dying light. Towering, 7 or 8 feet tall, cloaked in shaggy matted fur caked with ice. But the face, God, the face was the abomination. Elongated snout, yet eerily human, with high cheekbones and eyes that gleamed with intelligence. And it smiled, lips peeling back over jagged teeth in a grotesque parody of mirth. Panic erupted. David fired first, the crack splitting the night. Ryan and Jake followed, bullets tearing into the shadows. The figure jerked, vanishing with a guttural snarl. Echoes faded, leaving only their ragged breaths and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Did we hit it? Jake gasped. They waited, tensed, but nothing returned. Dawn crept in hours later, gray and unforgiving. Exhausted but alive, they scouted the perimeter. No tracks, no blood, just their own boot prints. Hallucination? From the cold? Ryan suggested weakly. But David knew better. The fear in his gut was real. They radioed the pilot, storm delay, pick up tomorrow. Stuck, they fortified. Tripwires with bells, perimeter logs, extra firewood for a bigger blaze. The day dragged, nerves frayed. Jake prayed quietly. Ryan sharpened knives. David replayed the sighting, doubting his sanity. As dusk fell, dread coiled tight. The footsteps returned, multiplied, multiple sets now, encircling like a noose. Howls erupted from all sides, a cacophony that drowned thought. Figures emerged, 5, 6, lurching with disjointed gaits, limbs bending wrong. Furred behemoths with those twisted, almost human faces, eyes reflecting firelight like coals. David shot one center mass. It staggered but advanced, wounds closing impossibly. Chaos, gunfire roared, creatures lunged. One seized Jake, claws raking deep furrows across his torso. He screamed, blood sprang snow red. David and Ryan poured rounds into it until it released, slinking away with a whine. Jake collapsed, gasping, wounds gaping. They dragged him behind a boulder, applying pressure with torn shirts, but blood pooled relentlessly. "Hold on, buddy," David urged, voice breaking. The creatures prowled the edges, patient, their breath steaming. Hours blurred, vigil, shots to Dieter, Jake's moans weakening. By pre-dawn he was gone, eyes vacant in the fire's glow. Sunrise banished the horrors. David and Ryan, hollow-eyed, wrapped Jake's body in a tarp. The plane arrived. The pilot, seeing the blood and grief, asked nothing. Back in civilization, authorities dismissed their tale. Bear attack, trauma-induced delusions. Autopsy cited mauling, case closed. Ryan drank himself numb. David quit hunting, haunted by nightmares of smiling faces in the dark. He hasn't returned to the backcountry. Whatever those things were, wendigos, skinwalkers, or something older, they wait still in Alaska's frozen heart. Hunting not for meat but for souls.